Hey, what's up guys? It's Jake aka Tag, and I am so psyched to bring you giant double minions played to perfection by Final Form today. He's going to end up having the Fireball bait with the double minions and the Musketeer. He's going to have Zap and Snowball bait with the Goblins and the double minions. So this deck is all about baiting out your opponent's spells. If they ever go in for a Fireball on top of your Musketeer, you tank for it with a Giant or a Miner. If they end up zapping or snowballing your double minions, then you can also tank for that with the Miner or the Giant. You're able to get a lot of chip damage, and it's so aggressive. I love this deck because no one else plays it, and I just want to give some love to an underappreciated deck that is actually super strong if mastered correctly. So let's go jump right into the first game that Final Form is going to play for us today. So jumping into our very first game against Golem, Final Form had one big tip in this matchup. The big thing that you want to keep in mind is always save your Giant or have Giant in cycle for the Golem. That means that you can cycle a Giant on defense or on offense if you know that you can get it back into cycle when your opponent is going to start the Golem. So you don't have to be like, oh, I need to keep it in hand, but you need to have it back in cycle at the very least, or be one card away from it so then you can get back to it. So the reason being is if you ever play super aggressive, your opponent will just thrash you, and you cannot feasibly defend against Golem pushes with this deck. You need to be all about counter pushing and taking the other side and making sure that they can't have a huge parade push on you. So that means when you start going in the opposite lane, that means that they can't actually dedicate all of their elixir to apply an aggression towards you. Because if they end up having spells, removal spells for the minions, a baby dragon, electro dragon, tornado, what ends up happening is if you go in for the minion horde, same lane, you're obviously just going to lose. So Final Form has crafted a way of winning this matchup. It's all about applying opposite lane aggression. I am sure as soon as we see a Golem, we're going to end up seeing a Giant and a minion horde placed in the river on the opposite side. That's really the only way that he can counteract this. If he decides to go same lane, as we were talking about before, he just straight up loses. So at the start of the game, what he wanted to do is he wanted to cycle Snowball, Goblins, or Miner. Those are the top cards that you want to cycle at the start. Never start off the game with a Giant. That is his #1 rule with this deck. Start off the game with a Giant, you can lose a lot of matchups. But as we saw, guys, it's very difficult to win this matchup if you decide to go sailing lane, so he decides to tower trade. And one of the big things that I want to cover in this matchup is he's tower trading, but he's tower trading opposite lanes, right? He's not going to be going into a 1-1 scenario where he's going to be forced to go same lane as his opponent. Because if his opponent starts a Golem on the tower that he wants to take, then he's obviously freeing up the right-hand side so he can win in a 2-1 scenario. And Final Form is going to play really aggressive there because he wants to make sure that he's going to keep up his little bit of advantage, and he's also going to make sure that his opponent never really has elixir for a Golem. If his opponent decides to go in for a Golem right now, you know what's going to happen. There's only 40 seconds remaining, so Final Form is for sure going to take the right-hand side. Now all he has to do is focus on defending. I would love to see like a Giant kite to the opposite lane. Really, when you're running like 3 Musketeers, the old school 3 Musketeers, Jewel always told me and always advocated for kiting your opponent's units to the opposite lane with like a Giant or a Battle Ram. And as you guys just see here, Final Form is doing the exact same thing. When you have a more flimsy deck, when you only have like minions or minion horde, you really need to make sure that you're kiting units to the opposite lane and also tanking for them. In a lot of games that you're about to watch today, you're going to see how well Final Form tanks for his towers and tanks for his minions and his Musketeer with the Giant. The Giant is going to be his main way of dealing with things in the final seconds because it's very hard to deal with bridge spam, especially a whole bunch of splash damage with the bridge spam if you don't have that Giant or the Miner tanking for it, because the Musketeer and double minions are just so dang flimsy. So the key takeaway in this matchup is go opposite lane of the Golem player, and you're probably going to end up in a 2-1 scenario. Usually it's not going to be a 1-0, but it could be a 1-0 if you have some miraculous defense. Usually it's going to be a 2-1 scenario for you if you keep the Giant in cycle and apply opposite lane aggression when they start the Golem in the back. So let's move right on to the next game and let's see what Final Form has in store for us. So we're going to be jumping right into the very next game against RG Lightning. Let's hit down our opponent's counters to the minions and the minion horde one by one, because that's what you need to keep in mind when you're playing this deck. Our opponent ends up having the Electro Wizard, the Furnace, and the Baby Dragon. The Baby Dragon, if you predict the placement of it, you can always tank for the minions or the minion horde on offense with the Miner. The Electro Wizard, if the opponent drops the Electro Wizard right on top and the minion horde is tanked for by the Giant or the Miner, the Electro Wizard does not fully kill. And as a result, the minions will provide a pretty nice counter push. The last thing on our list is the Furnace. The Furnace is the thing that is going to prevent you from dropping the minion horde or the minions on offense. Because if they drop it right on top of the minion horde or the minions, the fire spirits will always connect and you can't stop them. So our number one tip from Final Form in this matchup is you never want to drop the minion horde on offense if you know that your opponent ends up having the Furnace. So one thing that he just did right there is he actually went for conserving units on counter push opposed to dropping a ton of elixir there and conserving as much tower damage as possible. And as a result, he has a pretty substantial counter push and he takes tower. So with this deck, a lot of the times you're really going to be focusing on, just like you just saw in the Golem matchup, you're going to be conserving units more so than actually conserving tower damage. This deck is going to be very dynamic. It doesn't have great defensive capabilities. It has amazing offensive capabilities and destructive damage potential if your opponent does not have the answers that they need in cycle. So what you saw right then and there was the opponent went in for a Furnace on defense. It hit the minion horde, it killed the minion horde, but then he had no answer to the minions, and the minions took the tower along with the musketeer. He took a substantial amount of damage from the RG, but he had the baby dragon latched on top of the giant. When the baby dragon was latched onto the giant, he ended up dropping the minion horde. When the minion horde died to the Furnace, he dropped the minions, and then he was able to make an amazing counter push here. So let's drop back to the game how it is at the moment. He tried to go opposite lane, but he was greeted by barbarians. Unfortunately, barbarians are not usually in too many RG decks. Usually it's going to be like a lumberjack, and the lumberjack would have just gotten devastated there. But the barbarians have much higher DPS accumulatively. So at this point in time, we're going to see our friend Final Form just trying to defend his tower. It's at 1000 HP, at max tower damage, at max ladder. This is a point that you can try to defend it. He's going to go in for the fireball. He's also applying aggression towards the through crown at the same time. So if he does not defend this tower, which hopefully he does, right? Now it's at 297, so there's no way that he was able to. But if you get my drift, he would have been able to defend this if there was one less RG hit on that tower. Or actually 2 less RG hits. Then he would have been able to defend, but all of his units are applying aggression towards the 3 crown anyway. So basically, he was having a failsafe. He was like, okay, I'm going to try to defend this tower, but if I don't defend the tower, then I have units counter pushing towards the 3 crown, so I got the game in the bag either way. He's just going to go fireball with barbarians and win the game. So it was a very clean W. He tried to defend as long as possible while still knowing if I defend, I still get utility from my units. So it's really not too bad. Usually if you're not going to have utility from your units and you don't have that 3 crown, I would see him abandon that tower and work towards the other side. Don't always go for the defense unless you know that you're going to get something out of it, or if you think that there's a high probability of you defending. There was actually a pretty high chance of him being able to defend that, and there was also the counter push potential, so he went in for it. So very well played from Final Form there. The key takeaways from this matchup are going to be using your minions on offense when your opponent does not have Furnace in cycle, and also rallying and conserving your units more so than tower damage, because the counter push is much more devastating, and if your opponent overcommits with an RG early on and a baby dragon, they're not really going to have any way of defending you, as you just saw. So the next matchup that we're going to be covering is usually going to be a complete auto loss, but we want to cover it just to show you guys how Final Form attempts to play this matchup and what he wants to do to maximize his chances of winning. And that's one of the things that you always should do in Clash Royale. Even if you have a bad matchup, even if you have a matchup that is completely horrible and garbage and most of the time you will lose, you always want to play it to the best of your ability, because if your opponent makes a slip up, then you are going to be maximizing your odds of winning it. And you kind of want to play it like poker. Not always are you going to be winning with your hand, but you always want to make the best out of your given situation. So this is what he's going to be doing. He's going to be playing against Logbait with Prince and Inferno Tower, and he doesn't have any way of resetting the Inferno Tower. He doesn't have any way of killing the Zap, Fire Spirits, Ice Spirit, Prince. I mean, there's literally every card that his opponent could ever want to counter him, and then he doesn't have a great answer for the Goblin Barrel. So the main thing that he wants to do when he plays against Goblin Barrel is he's going to want to snowball it back or ended up using goblins. He doesn't really want to end up using his minions unless he wants to counter push with it. The musketeer probably even dies before it latches on and kills the princess, so that's incredibly unfortunate. But he's never really going to be playing super aggressive when he doesn't think that he's going to get utility from it. Unfortunately, his opponent had Zap and Ice Spirit there to kill the minions. He protected the minion horde with the giant. So that's one of the things that you guys want to keep in mind when you're watching this gameplay. Always look at his minion horde in coordination with the giant or the miner. Those placements are pivotal in being able to secure Ws. That giant placed at the river did not reset the animation of the princess. The princess did not latch back onto the minion horde there, and that would have been incredibly effective if his opponent had Log or Barbarrel there, but unfortunately he had Zap and he had Ice Spirit. So, literally just the hardest counter possible. He's going to end up going for a snowball. He's going to try to deny a lot of damage. He goes in for the goblins on the goblin gang. He's playing this about as well as he could. Look at the elixir advantage he has. In some of these matchups that are incredibly garbage for you, you need to have a huge elixir advantage because no matter how many counters your opponent has in hand, if they don't have elixir to field those counters, they're going to lose. So that's how he's playing it right now. He's trying to get a massive elixir advantage to win this game. He's going to go in for minions in the middle to maybe distract the Inferno Tower. He's going to go in for a miner on top of the princess to get a positive elixir trade because he's going to be able to kill the Inferno Tower. He's also going to make sure that the princess is going to die as well. So in my book, even though it's a 3 for 3, he clears the Inferno Tower. So since that's cleared, I think it's a positive elixir trade in my book. So remnants of the Inferno Tower are gone. He's going to go cycle a musketeer in the back. And he doesn't really see a big spell from his opponent. He just sees Zap, Fire Spirits, very fast cycle. This honestly looks like a snipe to me because it is at the top ladder. He's going to end up going for a Fireball to make sure that he mitigates damage from the Goblin Barrel, because if the Goblins are going to be tanked for by anything, then the game is pretty much over because your opponent is going to be targeting on top of units that are not killing the tower. And it's going to take a while for your tower to be focusing on top of those Goblins. So fortunately for Final Form that he's distributed the damage on both sides, he's going to end up going in for a Giant here, and usually how you win this matchup is either getting those minions on top of the Inferno Tower, so it's going to be tanking for the Giant, tanking for the Musketeer, or you want to get that Minion Horde on top of the tower and getting the Minion Horde tanked for. In this case scenario, he's going to actually tank for the Minion Horde. He gets the Musketeer locked on. The Musketeer is getting a crap ton of damage, so he played super aggressive there, guys, and it worked out really well. He's just a Fireball away, I believe. Fireball Snowball, potentially. Maybe he's going to end up going for a Miner here. We'll see. He's going to end up going for Minions, and then he goes in for the Fireball, and he has to go for the Snowball, and he barely wins the game. So playing that game pretty much perfectly, he barely wins it. So this is the worst matchup you could ever face. I hope that you guys were able to take away a few things from this game. Usually, you're going to end up playing against Log, which is a little bit easier, and you're not going to face Zap, plus Ice Spirit, plus Princess. So it will be easier, and I think in that case scenario, he would have actually got the Minion Horde earlier to the tower, and he would have gotten critical damage way easier. But this is like an abomination of the deck, and it's playing the game on brutal mode. You guys have probably played against hard mode if you play against a traditional log bait deck, so keep that in mind. So we're going to be jumping right into an Inferno Tower Balloon control deck. This matchup is going to be a little bit difficult if you don't play it correctly. So let's break it down what you need to do. You need to start off the game as soon as you recognize that your opponent doesn't have a big spell with Musketeer in the back when you're facilitating giant pushes. You want to end up going in for the minions in the middle to block the Inferno Tower. And then you want to end up going in for the Miner on top of the Musketeer or the tower, depending on where the Musketeer is placed and if your opponent has the ability of defending the Musketeer. So we're going to see Final Form defend the Miner with the Goblins. That's going to be your best answer no matter what Miner deck. You always want to use the Goblins because if your opponent uses a spell on it, obviously the minions are going to get value, the Minion Horde is going to get value, and that's going to be your best way of baiting out spells, is the Goblins. Goblins at the river, generally sometimes that baits out snowballs, and if that happens, then you're going to be free to dropping the Minion Horde or the minions. So what we were talking about earlier comes into effect. He drops the minions on offense to make sure that the Inferno Tower is going to be locked onto that, and then the Miner is going to survive longer, same with the Musketeer. So obviously, this is not meaning that the Giant is going to get to the tower. That's one of the biggest takeaways that you guys are going to see from this game. It does not matter. The Giant will never get to the tower in this matchup, or it never should, really. The main thing that you want to do is prolong the HP of the Musketeer or the Miner to get more damage on your opponent's tower or the minions. Because if the Giant is tanking longer, then your Musketeer effectively has more hit points, your Miner effectively has more hit points, and it will get more damage. So that's one thing that I want you guys to keep in mind. Do not care if your Giant gets to the tower. Only care about how long is it surviving, how long is it going to take up space and more hits, so then my units can get damaged, the actual units that matter, the Musketeer getting more hits off, baiting out more elixir, baiting out skeletons that otherwise wouldn't have happened. It's really important to make sure that you get that trade with your opponent 5 for 5, and then also get more value with your supporting units than they do. So another cool thing that you guys just saw right there, because the Ice Golem is going to be placed right on top of the balloon, any good balloon player will do that, especially at the top ladder. The big thing that you want to take away from that, if you just drop a Minion Horde right on top of that, the Ice Golem explodes, then they snowball or zap, and you're absolutely toasted. You are screwed, because the Ice Golem damages, the snowball finishes it off, but if he snowballs and pushes them away, then he makes sure that the push is a little bit disjointed from his opponent, and as a result, he is able to effectively deal with that without killing his entire Minion Horde, and then he gets chip damage as a result with the Miner. tanking for everything. So very well played. Another thing that I want to take away from this, you guys saw that really funky Inferno Tower placement. That Inferno Tower is going to be played when your opponent knows that you're going to drop minions in the middle. So you definitely want to switch up your minions placement if your opponent decides to go in for the Inferno Tower there. Very, very important. So Final Form has played this really well by consistently cycling his Musketeers in the back, then facilitating pushes with the Giant, the Minions, and the Miner and the Minions effectively finishing off the game. Also, the Musketeer applying a lot of aggression, a lot of threats that his opponent otherwise would have not had to deal with if the Giant was not on the map as long as it was. So Final Form played that really, really well. Got to make sure you start Musketeer first when your opponent doesn't have big spells. Got to make sure that you have those Minions to tank for the Giant. Not to just tank for the Giant to get to the tower, but to keep your units alive a little bit longer. And then obviously make sure that you snowball the balloon back and separate it from the Ice Golem. Definitely pushing it back, priority on pushing it back, because you don't end up having Zap to reset the Inferno Tower. Snowball is going to be primarily defensive in this matchup, especially when you play against a balloon player. So let's go jump into our last and final game against Hog Rider. So when we're playing against Hog Rider, the main thing that you got to think about, Snowball, going to be a super defensive card. It's going to be a card that you want to primarily use on defense to push back the Hog Rider so it gets less hits. That's something that you always see me do traditionally when I'm running like a Lumberjack deck. I Snowball Lumberjack, make sure it doesn't get a single hit. I Prince plus Snowball, make sure that Hog Rider doesn't get a single hit. You guys have seen that when I play Golem, and it's pretty effective with this deck as well with Minions or Goblins, just making sure that your opponent's Hog Rider gets less hits, especially when your tower is in that like 1,200 HP range, when it's super low and it's coming down to the wire and you need to defend the tower. So right out of the gate, Final Form sees Hog Rider, sees Miner, he's like, what is this deck? It's crazy. You wild, sir. And he's going to end up saucing out a WoW. He also sees Princess, and his opponent's going to end up having Zap. So this is going to be a very tough matchup. Mini P.E.K.K.A, and he's also going to have Barbarians. I mean, this deck is absolutely insane. It's like the Edmund Chen deck on steroids. I can't believe I'm seeing it right now. Anyway, you're going to be facing weird decks like this on ladder, so let's see how Final Form navigates it. He's going to end up dropping Minions to make sure that he's able to dissipate any of the ground units there. He's going to end up dropping Goblins. So Goblins are going to be a great answer to the Hog Rider, because if your opponent has Zap or Snowball, if they ever decide to do that, they're kind of screwed, because you end up having Minion Horde. You end up having Minions. They need to save their spells for that. So definitely really love Goblins in the deck as a result. He's going to end up dropping the Giant here, not really as a way of breaking through. He doesn't really expect this Giant to do anything. He knows it's going to get shut down. He just needed to make sure that he was able to apply some type of defensive to offensive conversion there, making sure that his Musketeer was a little bit more useful, also able to tank and draw out Elixir from his opponent. So as I was talking about before, this deck is all about keeping your minions alive. So Final Form made a really ballsy predict there, and it paid off. He got a lot of minion damage because he was able to predict the Princess, and he was able to snipe it without it killing the entirety of the minion horde. So that's what I was talking about earlier. Look at that Snowball. A very nice defensive card. So that's why I really like having Snowball in this deck, and I assume that's why Final Form really likes having Snowball in this deck. You guys have seen it time and time again. He's been using that Snowball on defense in so many clutch scenarios where he would have accumulated so much more damage. That Hog Rider for sure would have gotten a hit there, but potentially even freeing up his opponent to go in for a Zap and then get another one there if his opponent felt really like he could get a whole bunch of extra damage and potentially finish off the game. So yeah, it's always nice to limit your opponent. Musketeer is going to be able to snipe that Hog Rider, and the thing that I've noticed a lot of times when he's in these dicey situations, he likes just going in for the Musketeer and not really Gianting first. You guys tell me down below in the comment section, have you ever really seen him Giant first before going for a Musketeer, unless it's like a Golem game? I think the Golem matchup was the only one that he ended up doing that, but that's just something to take away. Usually you want to start the Musketeer if you can, especially if they have a small spell, and your opponent really can't punish it. So he's going to end up going for another Musketeer in the back. It's just his go-to play, and then it's not really going to get punished exceptionally hard. If he went in for a Giant there, he wouldn't have had Elixir for the minions, guys. He's going to end up going for the Fireball, and he's going to start chipping away. He realizes, hey, my Giant's not getting to the tower. You end up having mini P.E.K.K.A, you got so many answers to me. So I'm going to play this like a minor control deck and just use the Giant, the Santa Claus, as a mechanism of tanking and keeping my towers alive. So he tanked early on in the game. I wonder if he's going to do it again. It's usually just going to be Hog Rider, so I don't know if that's going to be the case. But if his opponent ends up spamming him with a mini P.E.K.K.A or something, I guarantee you he ends up going in for it. So those are Barbarians and Minions. Yeah, you can't really do anything here because if you end up dropping Minion Horde, it gets zapped. Notice how his opponent has Zap and Princess in cycle. So he actually has to drop the Giant. I was correct there. That's pretty cool. He's actually going to go drop a Miner on defense as well, so then he gets enough Elixir and he has enough things tanking so he can effectively Fireball out his opponent. So So very well played from Final Form. As you guys can see, one of the main things that you want to do, just reiterated, and just being force-fed to you guys, start that Musketeer in the back before starting Giant in most situations. And also, going for those predicts. Make sure you get that Miner on top of the tower with the minions. As you guys saw, you sniped the Princess, got rewarded handsomely for it. Drop the Giant down at the last desperate scenario if you need to defend for a few extra seconds. And then also, if your Giant can't get to the tower, abandon all hope of it, go in for Miners instead and fireball them out. It's a pretty cool deck to use, and definitely keep in mind against the Balloon decks and Hog Rider decks, especially the Hog Rider decks as we just saw, use that Snowball, be trigger happy with it, make sure you get those Goblins plus Snowball down, those Minions plus Snowball down, and deny all those Hog Rider hits to retain more HP on your towers. So very well played by Final Form. I was incredibly impressed. And that's actually where I'm going to end today's video. It was so cool to showcase a deck that just doesn't get too much love, but when it's played well, man is it strong. So guys, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to sauce me a fat thumbs up. Also, let me know down below in the comments section what pro and what deck archetype you guys want to see in future videos. Also, make sure to give Final Form some love. His Twitter will be down below in the description of the video and in the pinned comment. And I know that I don't say this too often, but I really appreciate each and every one of you guys that takes the time to watch my videos on a daily basis. It's just really cool to come down to the comment section and see that you guys are like, oh, I'm watching this during my lunch break, or I have a scheduled time that I always watch you. It's really cool, and it makes me smile every single time. So, love you guys. Huge shout out to everyone that's always giving me good vibes in the comment section. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. Thanks for chilling with me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.